Hey everyone, welcome to the Daily Senior Safety Advice Podcast. This is the show that helps older adults and family caregivers navigate the real challenges of aging at home with practical advice, honest information, and a whole lot of heart. I'm Esther Kane, a retired occupational therapist, certified aging in place specialist, and a dementia care specialist. And I am so glad that you're here with me today. But listen, before we get into the topic of today, a quick reminder to subscribe to the show on your podcast app or over on YouTube, and to share this episode with someone who might need it. And of course, visit us at seniorsafetyadvice.com anytime for free resources and tips that you can put to use right away, especially on this topic. Now, today we are tackling one of the most emotionally loaded conversations in caregiving. And I do mean loaded. I've been through this myself with my own mother. We're talking about the car keys, about driving, about what happens when someone you love may no longer be safe behind the wheel, and how on earth do you bring that up without blowing up your relationship or the conversation? So, if you've been dreading this conversation, or if you've already tried to have it and it went sideways, then this episode may be able to help you. We're going to talk about why it's so hard, what to avoid, what may actually work for you, and how to make sure that your loved one doesn't feel like they've lost everything just because they've stopped driving. So let's get into it. All right, let's start by really understanding what's at stake here. Because if we don't understand that, then we'll keep having this conversation in the wrong way. For most older adults, driving isn't just getting from point A to point B. Driving is independence. It's being able to go to the doctor without scheduling it around someone else's day. It's picking up grandchildren from school. It's getting to church on Sunday morning, meeting a friend for coffee, running to the store for what you need when you need it. Now, the car represents freedom. And for many older adults, especially those in suburban or rural areas where public transportation is limited or non existent, giving up driving doesn't just mean giving up the car. It can feel like giving up an entire way of life. Now, there's also something deeper going on. Driving is tied up in identity, in competence, in being the kind of person who takes care of themselves and others, not the kind of person who needs to be taken care of. Asking someone to stop driving can feel like saying, you're no longer capable, you're a burden, you're old. None of that, of course, is what you mean. But that's often what gets heard. That's often what the older person hears. And when people feel that message coming at them, well, they naturally get defensive. They get angry. They shut down. And then the conversation ends before it even really begins. In my clinical career, I worked as an occupational therapist specializing in geriatrics. I worked with many older adults who were eventually assessed for driving safety. And almost without exception, the hardest part wasn't the assessment itself, it was the conversation that led up to it. The families who had the most success were the ones who came in with empathy first and information second. When people feel understood, when they feel heard, they're far more open to hearing difficult things. Now, before we talk about how to have this conversation, let's talk about how to know when it's time to have the conversation. This isn't a talk to have just because your parent is getting older. Age alone is not a reason someone should stop driving. Plenty of people drive safely well into their 80s and beyond. What matters is function, vision, reaction time, cognitive processing, physical mobility, and judgment. In my experience as an occupational therapist, usually the very first things to go are reasoning and judgment, but they're also the most difficult things to assess. All right, so what are the signs that something may be shifting? Well, here's some things to watch out for: new dents or scrapes on the car that weren't there before, getting lost on familiar routes, confusing the gas pedal and the brake. That happens more often than you think. Drifting out of the lane or running stop signs or forgetting to turn on a turn signal. Trouble with nighttime driving, not seeing the red lights. Other drivers honking or reacting, and feeling anxious or confused after a drive that used to feel very routine. Now, you may notice these things yourself, or your parent might mention them, which would be a blessing. Sometimes older adults are more self aware about this than their families expect. In fact, some of the best handled transitions happen when the older adult brings it up first. And if that's your situation, consider yourself fortunate. If you're seeing multiple signs or one very significant one, then it's time to begin the process. Not someday, now. So here's a quick tip: keep a quiet, private log of specific incidents that you've witnessed or heard about. The date, what happened, any details you can gather. This isn't to build a case against your loved one. It's so that when the conversation gets heated, or if it got heated, and they say, well, that never happened, you have something concrete and calm to refer to. Specifics are far more powerful than general worry. You may even want to consider installing a dash cam in the front and the back. That may help to justify any issues or any questions. All right. So let's talk about the approaches that tend to make this worse, because a lot of well meaning families go in with the right intentions but the wrong strategy. All right. So there are four approaches I want to talk about. One is the ambush approach. This is when the whole family shows up, maybe at Thanksgiving dinner or a birthday party, and suddenly everyone is talking about dad's driving. Well, naturally, he's going to feel cornered, outnumbered. It can feel like an intervention. And people who feel attacked almost always fight back. Family gatherings are not the place for this conversation. The other approach is called the ultimatum. Something like, you might say something like, if you have one more fender bender, we're taking your keys. Well, ultimatums create power struggles, and the person who gets backed into a corner rarely backs down gracefully. More often, they dig in. The third approach is called leading with fear. You might say something like, Dad, you could kill someone, or you could kill yourself. Now, I understand why that gets said. The fear is real, but fear based language almost always shuts the conversation down. It feels like an attack on character rather than a conversation about safety. And the last approach I want to talk about is the creeping approach. This is when you mention it every single visit, every single phone call, until it becomes background noise. What starts as concern starts to feel like nagging. And the reaction to nagging is almost always to dig in harder. As I can tell you, that one thing I observed again and again was that the adult children who struggled most with this conversation were the ones trying to win an argument. The ones who had the most success were the ones trying to solve a problem together. Those two things feel completely different to the person on the receiving end. One creates adversaries, the other creates allies. Okay, so what does a better approach actually look like? Well, let's walk through it. Start with timing and setting. Choose a calm, private moment. Not a holiday, not right after an incident when emotions are already high, not with an audience. Go one on one, if possible, or with one other trusted person. Make sure there's no time pressure. This is not a 5-minute conversation, and it's definitely not one that you have just once. Lead with love, not alarm. Now that sounds something like, Mom, I've been thinking about you a lot lately, and I want to talk about something that's been on my mind. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I just want to share what I've been noticing and hear how you feel about it. Now, that kind of opener tells your loved one right away that this is a conversation, not a verdict. Use I statements instead of you statements. Things like, I've noticed, instead of, well, you keep doing. Statements like, I'm worried about, instead of, you're a danger. The difference is how those land is enormous. Name the specifics that you've seen calmly, without drama. Something like, last Tuesday, I noticed the car had a new scrape on the bumper. And you mentioned getting turned around on the way home from the pharmacy. Those things maybe want to check in with you. And then this is very important. Stop talking and listen. Always listen more than you talk. Ask them how they're feeling about driving lately. Ask if they've noticed anything themselves. You might be surprised. Some older adults have been privately worried and are actually relieved someone finally brought it up. Now, here's a quick tip. If your loved one gets upset and the conversation goes sideways, don't push through. It's okay to say something like, I can see this is hard to hear, and I don't want to upset you. Can we come back to this in a few days? This gives someone time to process. And time to process is not giving up, it's being strategic. All right, sometimes the conversation needs a completely different voice. And believe me, that's not a failure, that's being smart. A physician's opinion carries tremendous weight with many older adults. If your parent's doctor expresses concern about driving during routine appointment, that often lands very differently than the same concern coming from an adult child. Talk to the doctor privately before the appointment if you can, or mail them a letter. That's what we did with my mother's doctor. Share what you've been observing and ask them to please bring it up. Now, there are also certified driving rehabilitation specialists. These are occupational therapists with specialized training in driving assessment. They can conduct a formal evaluation of your loved one's driving ability. This takes the decision out of the family's hands entirely and puts it in the hands of a neutral professional. That can be a huge relief for everyone, including the older adult who may feel more comfortable hearing an objective assessment than a worried child's words or what they deem as an opinion. Your state's Department of Motor Vehicles may also allow family members or physicians to request a driving reevaluation. The process varies state by state, but it does exist, and it gives families a formal external pathway when informal conversations aren't working. And sometimes peer influence matters here too. If there's a trusted friend, a sibling, a pastor, rabbi, family doctor, whoever, who your parent respects deeply, that person's voice may open a door that yours cannot. Not because your relationship is less important, but simply because the family dynamic is complicated in ways that a trusted outside voice isn't. Now, here's something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The conversation about driving can't just end with, you shouldn't drive anymore. No, it has to include a plan for what comes next. Because if stopping driving means losing everything, the errands, the appointments, the social life, the sense of purpose, well, then of course someone is going to fight it with everything they have. So, your job as the caregiver having this conversation is to show that life on the other side of the car keys is still a good life, a full life, a life where they can still get where they need to go and do what they want to do. So, before the conversation happens, go and do some homework. Find out what transportation options actually exist in your loved one's community. Rideshare apps like Uber and Lyft. And now there are versions designed specifically for older adults and even handicapped. There's community shuttle services, medical transportation programs, volunteer driver networks through faith communities or local senior centers, family schedules that can cover the most important trips. Now, when you sit down for the conversation, you can say something like, well, I've been thinking about this, and I want you to know that if things do change with driving, we've definitely got options. I found a service that does grocery runs and doctor appointments, and I'd love to be the one to take you to your Thursday card game. That is a very different message than just saying, well, you're going to stop driving. The goal is to show your loved one that their independence isn't ending, it's just changing the way it's going to be done. The patients that I saw as an OT most gracefully move out of driving were the ones who felt that they were gaining something, a reliable way to get around without having to deal with the stress of traffic, the cost of gasoline, the cost of the insurance, the worry about parking, rather than simply losing something precious. Reframing is not a spin of the information. It's helping someone see a fuller picture of what their life can still look like. Okay. I want to step out of the caregiver mode for a moment and speak directly to any older adults who are listening to this today. Maybe someone in your life has brought up your driving. Maybe you yourself have noticed some changes and you're not quite sure what to make of them. Maybe this topic makes you feel defensive or sad or angry or scared. And I want you to know that all of those feelings make complete sense. So here's what I want you to hear from me. One person who cares about your safety to another, because that is the role of every occupational therapist, and that's what I've done for years, is the safety of my patients, the safety of my clients, and their families and the people around them. The people in your life who are bringing this up are not trying to take something away from you. They're scared. They love you, and they're doing an incredibly hard thing because they can't stand the thought of something happening to you. Now, you don't have to make any decisions today, but I do want to encourage you to stay open. If someone you trust is worried about your driving, it might be worth asking your doctor for an honest conversation about it. Or, hey, request a professional driving evaluation just to know where you stand. Knowledge is power, and it's never a bad thing. And if the day does come when driving isn't the right choice anymore, please know that your life, your independence, your value, and your story do not end there, not even close. All right, now, caregivers. Let's take a moment just for you because I know how heavy this can be. You may be managing this conversation while also managing 100 other things: doctor's appointments, medications, the house, your own family, your own life, your career. And on top of all of that, you're being asked to have one of the most emotionally complex conversations imaginable with someone that you love deeply. Please be patient with yourself. This rarely goes perfectly on the first try, and that's okay. And don't expect it to go well on the second, third, or fourth try either. Sometimes it takes a while. What matters is that you keep the door open, that you keep showing up, that even when the conversation gets hard, your loved one can feel that it's coming from love. Now, if your aging parent has dementia, well, that makes the whole thing different. This conversation carries its own additional layer of complexity. In some cases, the person may lack the insight to recognize their own driving difficulties. And in those situations, waiting for them to agree may not be a safe or realistic option. If that's where you are, please work with their doctor and consider a formal assessment. You may need to make this decision for them, even if they can't understand why. That is one of the hardest things a caregiver ever has to do, is to take over. And I want you to know it is still an act of love. All right, so let's bring it all home. The car keys conversation is hard, let's face it, because it touches something deeper than just driving. It touches identity, freedom, and fear of what comes next. When we understand that, we can approach it with the empathy that it deserves. Have the conversation privately, calmly, and one on one. Lead with love, empathy, and listen more than you talk. Use specific observations, not general alarm. Bring in a third party if you need to. And come to the conversation with a plan for what life looks like after, because that plan is what makes the whole thing feel survivable. And it also reduces the amount of fear. You're not taking something away from the person you love. You are trying to keep them safe, keep them in your life longer, and keep them and help them, to find a new way to stay connected to the world. That is caregiving at its best. And you can do this, and so can they. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. This topic sits close to my heart, and I hope something in this episode gave you a little more confidence or a little more comfort. going into this very difficult conversation. We do have several articles on seniorsafetyadvice.com about this topic, so please head on there and check them out. And of course, if you're looking for senior care services or certified aging in place specialist near you, then please head on over to aginginplacedirectory.com. There are wonderful professionals there ready to help. Now, if this podcast has helped you in any way, one of the biggest ways that you can support it is by subscribing, leaving a review, or liking the episode. Those simple actions may seem small, but they really do make a huge difference. They help the podcast reach more people, especially family caregivers, older adults, and professionals who may need this information and support right now. And honestly, your support helps me to continue creating these episodes each week. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for helping me to spread this message to others who may benefit from it. I'm Esther Kane. Stay safe, stay confident, and I'll see you in the next episode.